In this video, we are breaking down 2 hours of Simpsons moments that went too far. Every dark scene, every controversial choice, every line the show crossed and then pretended it didn't. Let's get started, starting with something that needs to be said before anything else. The Simpsons has been on the air since December 17, 1989, 36 seasons, 788 episodes. It is the longest-running American animated series, the longest-running sitcom, and the longest-running scripted primetime show in the entire history of television. It has been renewed through season 40. In 2025, Disney announced that the show had surpassed 1 billion hours streamed on their platform in a single year. 1 billion, that is not a television program, that is an institution, and institutions operate by different rules than everyone else. Back in the early 1990s, The Simpsons was considered dangerous. Schools across America actually banned Bart Simpson t-shirts. Parents organized campaigns against what they called a cartoon that encouraged disrespect and bad behavior. In 1992, sitting President George H.W. Bush stood in front of the country and said that American families should be more like the Waltons and less like The Simpsons. The show fired back the same week. Bart looked into the camera and said, "We're just like the Waltons. We're praying for an end to the Depression, too." That line was funnier than anything the White House could come up with, and it told the country exactly what kind of show this was. Transgressive, fearless, willing to take a shot at anyone, including the President of the United States, and do it with better comedic timing than any sitcom on television. The show lampooned Bush again in season 7, in an episode called Two Bad Neighbors, where a fictionalized version of the former president moved in across the street from The Simpsons and got into a petty feud with Homer over everything from borrowing tools to decorating the lawn. The show didn't just push back against criticism, it turned its critics into characters and made them look ridiculous. That was the energy The Simpsons ran on for its first decade. No target was too big, no topic was off limits. No joke was too sharp if the writing was good enough to justify it. And for a long time, the writing was good enough. The first 8 or so seasons of The Simpsons are among the most celebrated television ever produced. The show won dozens of Emmy Awards. It attracted guest voices from every corner of American culture, from Dustin Hoffman to Michael Jackson to Leonard Nimoy. It launched the careers of future late-night hosts and showrunners. Its writing staff held degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other elite institutions. These were not people pulling random gags out of thin air. These were some of the most intelligent, well-educated satirists in the country, and they were producing more comedic content per year than any other show in history. But here's the thing about a show that runs for 36 years. It doesn't stay the same. It can't. The writers change. The cultural landscape shifts. The audience grows older while the characters stay frozen in place. And the rules that governed the show's comedy in 1992, the invisible guardrails that kept the satire sharp without making it cruel, those rules started to erode, slowly at first, then all at once. And the show started going to places it never would have gone in its early years. Dark places, cruel places, places where the joke stopped being funny and started being something else entirely, something the audience didn't quite have a word for at the time, but that we can name now. The Simpsons went too far, not once. Not in one episode or one scene or one joke that missed the mark. The Simpsons went too far dozens of times, across decades, in ways that are visible in hindsight, even if they didn't register in the moment. Characters were degraded in ways the show never repaired. Entire nations were offended by stereotypes so broad that governments issued formal protests. A child character was driven to attempt suicide while the town cheered. A beloved character was sexually assaulted for a punchline. An episode was erased from existence so completely that it can't be found on any official platform anywhere in the world. And the most remarkable thing about all of it, the thing that makes this story worth telling, is that none of it stopped the show. Nothing stopped the show. It just kept going the way it always does, absorbing the controversy, shrugging off the backlash, resetting to normal by the next episode. The same family on the same couch in the same living room watching the same television as if nothing had happened. That's what we're going to examine for the next 2 hours. Not whether The Simpsons is a good show, it is. Not whether its golden age deserves the reverence it receives, it does. What we're going to examine is what happens when the most beloved cartoon in American history steps over the line. What happens when a show that built its reputation on fearless satire starts confusing fearlessness with recklessness? What happens when the jokes stop punching up and start punching down, and nobody in the writer's room has the authority or the desire to stop it? Because the truth about The Simpsons isn't that it occasionally went too far. The truth is that going too far became part of the show's identity. And once it started, once the audience accepted it, and the ratings held, and the merchandise kept selling, and the cultural relevance kept compounding, there was no mechanism to pull it back. No one in Springfield ever learns their lesson. Not Homer, not the town. And apparently, not the people writing the show either, so settle in, get comfortable. Because for the next 2 hours, we're walking through every moment that crossed the line, every episode that made you flinch, every scene that the show played for laughs and that you probably laughed at before realizing, years later, that something about it didn't sit right. And what we find might change the way you think about the most famous family in television history. Not because they're bad, but because the show that created them wasn't always careful about what it was willing to do to them. Let's start with the episode the show erased from existence. Not figuratively, not as a joke. Literally erased as if it never happened. The only episode in 788 that The Simpsons decided the world was no longer allowed to see. Season 3, Episode 1. The title is Stark Raving Dad. It aired on September 19, 1991, and for almost 3 decades it was one of the most beloved episodes in the show's history. The premise was simple. Homer wears a pink shirt to work after Bart accidentally puts his red cap in with the white laundry. His co-workers mock him. Burns sees the pink shirt and concludes that Homer must be insane. Homer is committed to a mental institution, and inside that institution, Homer meets a large, soft-spoken white man named Leon Kompowski, who believes with absolute sincerity that he is Michael Jackson. The guest voice was credited as John J. Smith, but everyone recognized the voice. It was Michael Jackson. The king of pop himself had called the show's producers and asked to be on the show. He wasn't doing it for the money. He wasn't doing it for the publicity. According to the people who worked on the episode, Jackson was a genuine fan of the show and wanted to be part of it. He recorded his dialogue. He worked with the writers to develop the character. And the result was one of the warmest, most emotionally resonant episodes of the early run. The episode ends with Leon helping Bart write a song for Lisa's birthday. When Lisa hears the song, she's moved to tears. Leon reveals that he isn't actually Michael Jackson. He's just a man who found comfort in pretending to be someone the world loved. He drops the voice, speaks in his real voice for the first time, and leaves the Simpson family having given them something genuine despite his delusion. It's a beautiful episode. It was a beautiful episode. It doesn't exist anymore. In 2019, HBO released a documentary called Leaving Neverland. The documentary presented allegations of child sexual abuse against Michael Jackson, featuring detailed testimony from 2 men who said they had been abused by Jackson as children. The documentary reignited public scrutiny of Jackson's legacy and forced institutions across the entertainment industry to reckon with their associations with him. The Simpsons reckoned faster than almost anyone. Executive producers Al Jean, James L. Brooks, and series creator Matt Groening made the decision together. Stark Raving Dad would be pulled from circulation, not edited, not given a disclaimer, not aired with a content warning or a contextual introduction. Removed, completely, permanently. The episode was taken off every platform. It was removed from Disney+, it was removed from Hulu, it was pulled from syndication, it was excised from FXX reruns. When the Season 3 DVD set was reprinted, the episode was omitted from the disc. When Disney Plus launched its 24/7 Simpsons streaming channel in March of 2025, a channel that features episodes from all 35 completed seasons running on a continuous loop, Stark Raving Dad was not included. It is the only episode in the entire history of The Simpsons to be completely banned from all official distribution channels. Think about what that means for a moment. 788 episodes, 36 seasons spanning more than 3 decades. The show has depicted violence, substance abuse, infidelity, corruption, environmental catastrophe, political assassination, child endangerment, and nearly every other controversial topic imaginable. And out of all of that, one episode was deemed so unacceptable that it had to be erased. Not an episode that depicted something graphic. Not an episode that crossed a line in its content. An episode that was warm and funny and emotionally generous, but that featured the voice of a man whose legacy had become too toxic to touch. The episode didn't go too far in 1991 when it aired. It went too far in 2019 when the context around it changed. And that raises a question the show has never answered. If the episode itself was innocent, if the story was gentle and the performance was sincere and the only problem was who provided the voice, then what exactly was being punished? The episode? The character? The memory of a man whose guilt was never established in a court of law? Or was it something else entirely? Was it the show protecting itself from association? Was it a calculated decision to remove a liability before anyone could use it as ammunition? Because the show didn't issue a statement explaining the artistic reasoning. There was no public conversation about the ethics of erasure versus context. There was no attempt to add a disclaimer or let the audience decide for themselves. The episode was simply gone. One day it existed, the next day it didn't. And 788 became 787 as far as the official record was concerned. The fans who grew up with that episode, who watched it dozens of times, who memorized Lisa's birthday song and sang it to their own siblings, those fans can no longer access it through any legitimate channel. The episode exists now only in bootleg copies, in fan archives, in the memories of people who saw it before the door closed. It has become a ghost episode hovering at the edge of the show's official history, acknowledged to have existed but no longer permitted to be seen. And the show never addressed the removal on screen. There was no moment where a character referenced what happened. There was no meta joke about an episode going missing. The Simpsons just continued the same way Springfield always continues after something terrible happens. The slate was wiped clean, the official narrative moved forward. And anyone who noticed the gap was left to draw their own conclusions. This is the first and most literal example of The Simpsons going too far. Not in what the episode contained, but in how the show handled it. Erasure is not accountability. Removing an episode from circulation doesn't undo the fact that it was made, that it aired, that millions of people watched it, that it shaped their relationship with the show and with the guest star who appeared in it. Erasure is the illusion of accountability. It's the appearance of taking action while actually just making the problem invisible. The Simpsons didn't reckon with Stark Raving Dad, it disappeared it, and in Springfield making things disappear is practically a tradition. But at least Stark Raving Dad was removed because of something that happened outside the show. What about the episodes that went too far because of what happened inside them? The episodes that aired, that everyone saw, that the show never pulled and never apologized for and never acknowledged had crossed a line? Those episodes are still on Disney Plus right now. You can watch them tonight if you want, and some of them will make you wonder how they ever got past the first draft. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the episode that many fans and critics consider the exact moment The Simpsons lost its soul. The precise scene where the show stopped being the smartest comedy on television and became something it could never fully come back from. Season 12, Episode 5, Homer vs. Dignity. It aired on November 26, 2000. It was written by Rob Lezebnik, and it contains a scene so infamous that a critic from The Guardian suggested in January of 2012 that the phrase "raped by a panda" should replace "jump the shark" as the universal shorthand for a once great show collapsing into self-parody. Here's what happens. The Simpsons are broke. Again. Their credit cards are being rejected at restaurants. Homer can barely afford to gas up the car. Family visits a financial planner who tells them bluntly that their only option is more money because Homer is too stupid to follow any kind of budget. Homer goes to Mr. Burns and asks for a raise. Burns has a different idea. Smithers is away on vacation, performing in a musical he wrote about Malibu Stacy. Burns is bored, he's looking for entertainment, and he decides to hire Homer as his personal jester, his prank monkey, as Burns calls it. The arrangement is simple. Burns pays Homer to humiliate himself and other people for Burns's amusement. Homer agrees because he needs the money. And the humiliations begin. The first prank is relatively tame. Burns pays Homer to throw a dish of pudding at Lenny. Lenny gets hit in the eye and delivers the line that everyone remembers from the episode, the only genuinely funny thing in the entire 22 minutes. "Ow, my eye, I'm not supposed to get pudding in it." After that, the pranks escalate. Homer dresses up like a baby in a men's bathroom and pretends to need a diaper change. Homer's told to do increasingly degrading things, and he does every single one of them because the money keeps coming. He keeps his arrangement with Burns a secret from his family. He dodges Marge's questions about where the extra cash is coming from. And the show keeps pushing, keeps going darker, keeps testing how far it can take the premise before someone in the audience flinches. Then the panda scene happens. Burns arranges for Homer to dress in a panda costume and infiltrate the Springfield Zoo as a new female panda named Sim Sim. Homer gets into the enclosure. The zoo staff use electric prods on him, not realizing there's a human inside the costume. Homer screams. Lisa, who is watching from outside the enclosure, notices that something is wrong. She hears human screams coming from inside the costume. She sees smoke rising from the eye holes of the panda suit. She says out loud, "Something is terribly wrong." And then the zoo's male panda takes notice of Sim Sim. The male panda approaches Homer. The camera pulls back. Curtains close. And behind those curtains, it is heavily implied that the male panda sexually assaults Homer, while Burns watches from a distance, laughing hysterically, and Homer screams for help that doesn't come. That's the scene. That is an actual scene from an actual episode of The Simpsons, a show that at the time was still considered one of the greatest comedies in American television history. A scene in which the main character, a father of three, a man the audience has loved for over a decade, is sexually assaulted by an animal while his employer watches and laughs. The reaction from fans and critics was immediate and has never subsided. The episode is consistently ranked among the worst in the entire series. Critics have described the panda scene as the show at its lowest and most vulgar. The DVD commentary acknowledged that fans hated the episode, but showrunner Mike Scully defended it by arguing that the viewers simply were not familiar with The Magic Christian, a 1969 British film about a billionaire who pays people to degrade themselves for money, which Scully said was the inspiration for the episode's premise. The defense missed the point so completely that it almost made things worse. Nobody was confused about the reference. People understood the concept of a rich man paying someone to humiliate themselves. What people couldn't accept was the specific form the humiliation took. The Simpsons was not South Park. It was not Family Guy. It was not a show that had ever operated in the territory of shock comedy. For 12 seasons, the show had distinguished itself through intelligence, through wit, through satire that made its audience feel smarter for watching. And then it put its main character in a panda costume and had him assaulted by an animal for a laugh. The panda scene became a symbolic dividing line in the show's history. For a significant portion of the fan base, this was the moment. Not the moment the show started declining, that debate has been raging since the late 1990s, but the moment the decline became undeniable. The moment the show demonstrated that it no longer understood what it was. That it had lost the internal compass that once told its writers the difference between edgy and degrading, between dark humor and cruelty, between pushing a boundary and obliterating it. And this wasn't the last time. That's the part that stays with you. If the panda scene had been an isolated lapse, a single miscalculation by a writing staff that otherwise maintained the show's standards, it could be written off as an aberration. But it wasn't isolated. 3 seasons later, in season 14, an episode called The Strong Arms of the Ma aired. The premise involves Marge being mugged while carrying baby Maggie. The mugging traumatizes her so severely that she develops agoraphobia and becomes unable to leave the house. She retreats to the basement where she discovers a set of weights belonging to Rainier Wolfcastle. She starts lifting. She gets stronger. She overcomes her fear. She leaves the house. She even tracks down the man who mugged her and gets her revenge. So far, so good. The episode is actually praised by many viewers for how realistically it depicts Marge's trauma and recovery in those early scenes. But then the episode keeps going. Marge becomes obsessed with bodybuilding. She begins taking anabolic steroids. Her personality changes. She becomes aggressive, controlling, violent. And in one scene, Marge wants to be intimate with Homer. Homer doesn't want to. He tries to say no. And Marge tells him explicitly that she wasn't asking permission. The morning after, Homer is shown limping, exhausted, and in visible pain. The show played this for laughs. The DVD commentary by showrunner Al Jean and writer Carolyn Oman does not characterize the scene as depicting assault. They describe it as a joke about Marge becoming more masculine and Homer being dominated. But the scene depicts a man saying no and being ignored. It depicts physical consequences. It depicts a power dynamic where one partner is on steroids and the other is afraid. Homer Simpson was sexually assaulted twice in 3 seasons, once by a panda, once by his wife. Both scenes were played for comedy. Neither was ever acknowledged by the show as crossing a line, and both are still available to stream right now on Disney Plus without a content warning of any kind. The question these episodes raise isn't whether a comedy show is allowed to go to dark places, it is. Some of the greatest comedies ever made live in the darkest possible territory. The question is whether the show understood what it was depicting, whether the writers recognized that what they were putting on screen wasn't edgy or transgressive or boundary-pushing. It was just an assault played for laughs. And played for laughs is not the same thing as being funny. The panda scene didn't kill The Simpsons. The show survived it the way it survives everything. But it marked a turning point that the show has never fully reversed. It established that The Simpsons, in its post-Golden Age incarnation, was willing to do anything for a reaction. Anything, including things that its earlier self would never have considered. And once that door was open, it stayed open, because The Simpsons doesn't close doors, it doesn't learn lessons. It doesn't remember what happened last episode, it just resets and starts again, the same family on the same couch, as if nothing ever went wrong. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the episode that took the show's cruelty toward its own characters to a place that many fans consider unforgivable. The episode where Springfield didn't just turn on a character, it tried to destroy a 10-year-old boy. Season 18, Episode 18. The Boys of Bummer. It aired on April 29, 2007. It was written by Michael Price and directed by Rob Oliver. And if you've never seen it, what I'm about to describe is going to sound like I'm making it up. I'm not. Every detail is real. Every scene aired exactly as I'm describing it on the Fox network during prime time. The episode begins normally enough. The Springfield Isotots, the town's Little League baseball team, are playing in a championship game against Shelbyville. The game is close. Springfield is winning 5-2 in the bottom of the 9th inning with 2 outs. Then Shelbyville loads the bases. Their batter hits a fly ball. The ball goes straight to Bart. All Bart has to do is catch it, and Springfield wins the championship. He reaches up, the ball hits his glove, and he drops it. He fumbles the catch and can't pick the ball up off the ground. All 4 Shelbyville runners score. Springfield loses 6-5. This is a children's baseball game, a Little League championship. And what follows is 22 minutes of a 10-year-old boy being psychologically annihilated by the entire population of his hometown. The crowd at the game boos Bart immediately. They throw beer at him. A 10-year-old child is pelted with beer by adults in the stands of a Little League game. Bart tries to leave. He runs toward the exit, and Chief Wiggum, the chief of police, stops him. Wiggum tricks Bart into getting into his police car, presumably to take him home, to get him away from the crowd. Instead, Wiggum drives Bart back onto the field so the spectators can continue abusing him. A police officer tricks a traumatized child and returns him to his abusers. That's played for a laugh. Bart becomes a social pariah overnight. He's afraid to leave his house. The town hasn't just turned on him, it has decided collectively that this child deserves permanent punishment for dropping a ball in a baseball game. Lisa, trying to help, takes Bart to meet Joe LaBute, a fictional baseball player who had a similar experience decades earlier. LaBute made a catastrophic error in the 1943 World Series that scarred the First Lady. Bart goes to meet him expecting empathy, expecting someone who understands what he's going through. Instead, when LaBute learns who Bart is, he turns on him instantly. He gets the entire room to boo Bart. The one person who was supposed to understand, the one person who had been through the same thing, joins the mob, and as the crowd jeers at a sobbing 10-year-old, LaBute adds his own voice to the chorus. "Boo," he says. "Boo, indeed," that's the line. "Boo, indeed," directed at a child who is visibly in crisis. Bart breaks. The show depicts it with an honesty that is more disturbing than almost anything it has ever aired. The next morning, Lisa wakes up and finds that someone has spray painted the words, "I hate Bart Simpson," across the front of the family's house. She and Marge go outside and discover that the phrase has been painted on every surface in Springfield. On buildings, on sidewalks, on parked cars, on a passed-out Barney Gumble. Every surface in the town is covered with the same message, and then they look up and see the source. Bart is on top of the water tower. He has climbed the tallest structure in town. He is spray painting "I hate Bart Simpson" on the tower, and the town has gathered below to watch, not to help, not to call for an ambulance or a crisis team or a parent, to watch, and to encourage what happens next. Chief Wiggum, the same officer who tricked Bart into returning to the field, looks up at the 10-year-old boy standing on the edge of a water tower and tells him to jump. Let me repeat that. A police officer tells a child to jump off a water tower. The crowd cheers. They want him to jump. They are actively encouraging a 10-year-old boy to end his own life because he dropped a ball in a baseball game. Bart lets go of the rope. He falls from the water tower. Laboot, seeing what his cruelty has caused, tries to catch Bart but trips and misses. Bart hits the ground. He survives, barely, and is rushed to the hospital by Dr. Hibbert. He is unconscious. He is in a hospital bed. He is a child recovering from what the episode openly depicts as a suicide attempt triggered by sustained community-wide psychological abuse. And while Bart lies in that hospital bed, the townspeople gather outside. They don't gather to hold a vigil. They don't gather to express remorse. They gather to continue chanting. "Bart sucks," they chant, outside the hospital room of a 10-year-old boy who just tried to kill himself. Bart sucks. The episode does eventually course correct. Marge storms out of the hospital and confronts the crowd. She delivers a speech about how they emotionally tormented her son to the point where he tried to end his own life. She points out that Springfield has a billboard proudly declaring itself the meanest city in America. The crowd is shamed. They apologize. Lisa proposes that they restage the championship game to give Bart a chance at redemption. After 78 attempts, Bart catches the ball. The town cheers. And in a flash forward 60 years later, a 70-year-old Milhouse almost lets it slip to a 70-year-old Bart that the game was rigged, then stops himself when Bart starts to cry. That's the ending. A child is bullied into a suicide attempt. The town apologizes after being shamed by his mother. They restage the game 78 times until he catches the ball. And then the show reveals that even the redemption was a lie. The entire resolution was staged. The crowd let Bart fail 77 times before he finally succeeded. They humored him the way you humor a broken person, and 6 decades later, the truth of what they did to him is still capable of making him cry. The episode holds a 5.9 out of 10 on IMDb from over 1,900 user votes, one of the lowest ratings in the show's history. When it originally aired, it drew 7.57 million viewers and earned a Nielsen rating of 3.6 in the 18 to 49 demographic. IGN gave it a 4 out of 10 and criticized the episode for losing all emotional nuance by making the residents of Springfield so incredibly cruel to Bart for no proportional reason. Fans and critics have debated this episode for almost 2 decades. The consensus, to the extent that one exists, is that The Boy's a Bummer represents the single cruelest thing The Simpsons has ever done to one of its own characters. Springfield has always had a mob mentality. That's part of the show's satirical DNA. The town riots over trivialities. It turns on its heroes over nothing. It has the collective attention span of a goldfish and the moral compass of a weather vane. But there's a difference between depicting a mob and weaponizing it against a child. There's a difference between satirizing groupthink and showing an entire community encourage a 10-year-old to kill himself. The satire requires distance. It requires the audience to understand that what's happening is absurd, that the show is exaggerating for comedic effect, that the cruelty is a funhouse mirror version of real behavior. The Boy's a Bummer doesn't maintain the distance, it collapses it. The cruelty is so sustained, so specific, so relentless, that it stops feeling like satire and starts feeling like something the show is doing to Bart rather than commenting on. The episode was noted for paralleling real-world incidents of fan fanaticism, including the vilification of baseball player Bill Buckner after his infamous error in the 1986 World Series and the harassment of Steve Bartman after the 2003 Cubs playoff debacle. The satirical intent was visible. The execution destroyed it because the real-world targets of fan rage were adults. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. And in this episode, his entire community told him to die because of a baseball game. The show never revisited the events of this episode. It never checked in on Bart's mental health after what happened. It never explored the long-term consequences of a child being driven to a suicide attempt by the adults in his community. By the next episode, everything was back to normal. The loop reset, Springfield forgot. And Bart was back at his desk in Mrs. Krabappel's classroom, cracking jokes, pulling pranks, and being the troublemaker the audience expected him to be. As if nothing had happened, because in Springfield, nothing ever happened. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to a controversy that didn't erupt from a single episode, but from 3 decades of accumulated impact. A character who was beloved, imitated, and quoted by millions of Americans, and who simultaneously caused real, measurable harm to an entire community of people. This is the story of Apu, the problem that took 30 years to name, and the show's response that made everything worse. Apu Nahazapima Petalan was introduced in the early seasons of The Simpsons as the Indian immigrant owner of the Quick E-Mart, Springfield's ubiquitous convenience store. He spoke with a thick, exaggerated Indian accent. He was hardworking, educated, devoutly Hindu, and deeply committed to his community. In many ways, Apu was one of the most fully developed characters on the show. He had backstory, he had emotional depth, he had episodes dedicated to his arranged marriage, his octuplets, his struggles with citizenship, his relationship with his mother. The writers didn't treat Apu as a one-note stereotype. They gave him an inner life that most supporting characters on The Simpsons never received. But there was a problem so deeply embedded in the character's foundation that no amount of nuanced writing could fully overcome it. Apu was voiced by Hank Azaria. Hank Azaria is a white man, and the voice Azaria used for Apu was an exaggerated Indian accent that, regardless of the care put into the character's stories, became the single most widely imitated Indian accent in America. For an entire generation of South Asian Americans growing up in the United States, Apu wasn't a beloved cartoon character. He was the sound that bullies made in the hallway. He was the voice classmates put on when they wanted to mock you. He was the thing people shouted at you from car windows. "Thank you, come again." That was the line, 3 words, delivered in an accent that a white actor invented in a recording booth. And those 3 words followed South Asian Americans through their childhoods, their adolescences, their professional lives. They were repeated by coworkers at office parties, by strangers in grocery stores, by people who thought they were being friendly, who thought they were making a connection, who had no idea that the voice they were doing was the same voice that had been used to humiliate an entire demographic for 30 years. The character existed for decades before anyone with a significant public platform articulated the problem. In 2017, comedian Hari Kondabolu released a documentary called The Problem with Apu. The film was not an attack on The Simpsons, it was a thoughtful examination of how a fictional character had shaped real-world perceptions of South Asian identity in America. Kondabolu interviewed actors, writers, academics, and community members about the experience of growing up in a country where the most visible representation of their culture on mainstream television was a caricature voiced by a white man. The documentary was well received, it started a national conversation, it put pressure on The Simpsons to respond, and the show did respond in the worst possible way. Season 29, Episode 15, No Good Read Goes Unpunished. The episode aired in April of 2018. In a subplot that lasts only a few minutes, Lisa is reading a book to Marge and discovers that the book contains stereotypes that were considered acceptable when it was written but are now recognized as offensive. Lisa tries to update the book to be more inclusive, but each change makes the story worse. She can't figure out how to fix something that was built on a broken foundation. And then Lisa turns to the camera. She breaks the fourth wall, something The Simpsons almost never does. She says, directly to the audience, something that started decades ago and was applauded and inoffensive is now politically incorrect. What can you do? And as she says this, the camera pans to a framed photograph of Apu sitting on the nightstand. Apu, the character they are choosing not to address. Apu, the photograph, not even the person, just a picture. And Marge responds, "Some things will be dealt with at a later date." Lisa looks into the camera. "If that's what you think, I agree with you," she says, and the scene ends. That was the show's official response to a documentary about how a character they created had harmed an entire community for 3 decades. A shrug, a wink, a fourth wall-breaking dismissal that essentially told the audience, "We know there's a problem, and we're not going to do anything about it." The backlash was fiercer than anything the original documentary had generated. The show's response confirmed the worst suspicion of its critics, that The Simpsons understood the harm Apu had caused and chose not to engage with it. That the show's writers looked at 30 years of cultural damage and decided that the most appropriate response was a punchline about political correctness. The scene was criticized across major publications. Social media erupted. Kondabolu himself expressed disappointment, noting that the response demonstrated exactly the kind of dismissiveness his documentary had been examining. What happened next unfolded over the following 2 years. Hank Azaria stepped away from voicing Apu. He stopped doing the character in 2020. He later spoke publicly about the process of understanding why the voice was harmful, describing it as a journey that required him to listen to people he had hurt, even unintentionally. The Simpsons announced that white actors would no longer voice non-white characters, a policy change that also led to the recasting of Dr. Hibbert and Carl Carlson. Apu was largely phased out of the show. He stopped appearing in new episodes in any significant capacity. The character who had been a fixture of Springfield for 3 decades, who had his own multi-episode story arcs, who had been given octuplets and a wife and a PhD and a coming to America origin story, simply faded from view. Not killed off, not given a farewell, not addressed in a way that acknowledged the complexity of the situation. Just quietly removed from the rotation, the way you remove a product from a shelf when you realize the packaging is offensive. And this is where The Simpsons went too far, not in a single moment, but in a sustained, structural way. The problem with Apu was never that one joke crossed a line. The problem was that the line was crossed in 1990 when the character was created and then crossed again in every subsequent episode for the next 30 years. The harm was cumulative, it was generational, it was baked into the character's DNA, into the accent, into the catchphrase, into the very structure of how American television chose to represent over 1 billion people through the voice of a white comedian doing an impression. The show's defenders will point out that Apu was more than a stereotype, that the character had depth, agency, and humanity that most animated supporting characters never receive. And that's true. But depth doesn't cancel out damage. A well-written Indian character with a mocking accent performed by a white actor is still a mocking accent performed by a white actor. The quality of the writing doesn't negate the harm of the representation. It actually makes the harm more complicated because it allows people to say, but they treated him with respect, as if respectful writing excuses the fundamental choice to build a character on a caricature. The Simpsons created Apu in an era when nobody questioned these decisions, when nobody had the platform or the cultural language to articulate why a white actor performing an Indian accent for laughs might cause real harm to real people. The show cannot be blamed for operating within the norms of its time, but it can be held accountable for how it responded when those norms changed. And its response, a dismissive fourth wall joke followed by years of slow, silent erasure, was not accountability. It was brand management. Apu was too far. Not because the character existed, but because the show spent 30 years defending the indefensible, 3 decades building a castle on a cracked foundation, and then when the cracks finally became impossible to ignore, it didn't repair the foundation. It just stopped building and walked away. And somewhere in Springfield, the Quickie Mart is still open, but nobody is behind the counter anymore. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the catalog. The collection of individual scenes and episodes that crossed lines the show never should have crossed. Some of them are famous, some of them have been largely forgotten. All of them aired on network television, most of them during a time slot when children were watching, and every single one of them is still available to stream right now. Let's start with the death that changed the show permanently. Season 11, Episode 14, Alone Again, Natra Diddley. The one where Maud Flanders dies. Maud Flanders had been a recurring character since the show's earliest seasons. She was Ned's wife, the soft-spoken, devout Christian woman who complemented her husband's relentless positivity with a quiet warmth of her own. She wasn't a major character. She didn't have many solo storylines. But she was part of the fabric of Springfield, part of the texture that made the town feel lived in and real. In the real world, Maggie Roswell, the voice actress who played Maude, had a pay dispute with the show's producers. She wanted to be compensated for the cost of flying from her home in Denver to Los Angeles for recording sessions. The producers refused to meet her terms. Roswell left the show. And the writers decided that rather than recast the character, they would kill her. The death itself is Homer's fault. The Simpsons are at the Springfield Speedway. A t-shirt cannon fires into the crowd. Homer sees the t-shirt coming and ducks to pick up a bobby pin from the ground. The t-shirt flies over his head and hits Maude Flanders in the chest, knocking her off the back of the bleachers. She falls to the ground below, and she dies. Let me say that again more slowly. A woman dies because Homer ducked to grab a bobby pin. His reflexive selfishness, his complete inability to think about anyone other than himself for even a fraction of a second, results directly in the death of his neighbor's wife, the woman who lived across the street from him for over a decade, the mother of Rod and Todd Flanders. Gone because Homer wanted a free t-shirt and then didn't even catch it. The episode that follows deals with Ned's grief, and to the show's credit, it handles the aftermath with more emotional honesty than many fans expected. Ned breaks down. He loses his faith. He struggles to be a father to his boys without Maude beside him. The episode is genuinely moving in places, but the fact remains that the show killed a beloved supporting character because of a backstage contract dispute, and it did so by making the death Homer's fault. Homer Simpson, the protagonist, the man the audience is supposed to root for, is directly responsible for the death of a woman, and the show never holds him accountable. Not in that episode, not in any subsequent episode. Homer caused Maude's death, and the universe of The Simpsons simply absorbed it and moved on. Ned forgave Homer because that's what Ned does, the town forgot because that's what Springfield does, and the audience was left with a death that felt less like a creative choice and more like collateral damage from a salary negotiation. Now let's talk about Homer's Enemy, Season 8, Episode 23, aired May 4th, 1997, written by John Swartzwelder. IMDb rating 9.3 out of 10, one of the highest rated episodes in the entire series, and one of the darkest things the show has ever done. The episode introduces Frank Grimes, a new employee at the Springfield nuclear power plant. Frank Grimes is everything Homer is not. He grew up in poverty. He worked multiple jobs to put himself through school. He earned his degrees and his certifications through relentless effort. He is competent, diligent, intelligent, and hardworking. He has fought for everything he has. Nothing was given to him. Nothing was easy. And then he meets Homer, a man who has the same job, the same security, the same paycheck, and who earned none of it. Homer sleeps at his desk. Homer eats donuts during meltdown warnings. Homer has a beautiful wife, a nice house, 3 children, loyal friends, and the respect of his community despite being spectacularly incompetent at everything he does. Homer's life is a monument to unearned privilege, and Frank Grimes can't understand how it's possible. The episode tracks Frank's descent from confusion to frustration to genuine rage. He becomes obsessed with exposing Homer's incompetence. He becomes fixated on making the world see what he sees, that Homer's existence is an insult to everyone who works hard and plays by the rules. And the world doesn't see it. Nobody in Springfield cares that Homer's incompetent. They love him anyway. They always have. Frank Grimes snaps. In the final scene of the episode, he tries to act like Homer. He grabs a high-voltage cable without gloves, laughing maniacally, imitating Homer's carelessness. The electricity kills him instantly. Frank Grimes dies because he tried to exist the way Homer exists, without consequences, without accountability, and discovered that the rules that don't apply to Homer still apply to everyone else. And then the funeral. Frank's funeral is the darkest moment in the episode. The mourners gather. Homer falls asleep in the pew. He mumbles in his sleep about changing the channel. And the mourners, the people who came to pay their respects to a man who died in front of them, start laughing at Homer. They laugh at the man whose incompetence drove Frank to his death while they're standing over Frank's body. The episode is brilliant. It's widely regarded as a masterpiece. But it's also one of the cruelest things the show has ever done because it's not cruel in the way The Boys a Bummer is cruel. It's cruel in a way that implicates the audience. The audience loves Homer too. The audience forgives Homer too. The audience has been laughing at Homer's incompetence for 8 seasons without questioning why a man like Homer gets to coast through life while men like Frank Grimes get destroyed by it. Frank Grimes is the show holding up a mirror and saying, you know, Homer shouldn't have any of this, right? And the audience's response then and now is to keep laughing. Homer's enemy went too far because it went too deep. It didn't just cross a line, it showed you that the line had never existed, that The Simpsons, the beloved family comedy, had always been built on a foundation of cosmic injustice, and that the audience was complicit in it because they liked Homer too much to care. Now let's talk about The Crepes of Wrath, Season 1, Episode 11. This is from the very first season, before the show had even established its identity. And it contains one of the most disturbing storylines the show would ever produce. Bart is sent on a foreign exchange trip to France. He's placed with two winemakers named Cesar and Ugolin. The men are criminals. They are producing counterfeit wine by mixing antifreeze into their product. And they essentially enslave Bart. They force him to work. They refuse to feed him properly. They make him sleep on the floor. And they make him test their wine, the wine that contains antifreeze, to see if it's drinkable. A 10-year-old boy is forced to drink antifreeze by his guardians while in a foreign country, and nobody checks on him. Nobody intervenes. The episode resolves when Bart, after weeks of abuse, finally manages to communicate with the police officer and expose the winemakers. But the resolution doesn't erase what happened. A child was trafficked into a forced labor situation, poisoned, and abandoned by the foreign exchange program that sent him there. And the show played it as an adventure. The tone was light. The music was whimsical. The episode treated Bart's enslavement and poisoning as the setup for a feel-good ending where the kid outsmarts his captors. Season 1, Episode 11. The Simpsons was crossing lines before it even knew where the lines were. Let's also address 201 Greyhounds from Season 6, Episode 20. The plot involves Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, fathering 25 puppies. The puppies are adorable. The family adores them. And then Mr. Burns steals them. Burns takes all 25 puppies with the intention of killing them and turning them into fur coats. It's a direct parody of 101 Dalmatians, with Burns playing the role of Cruella de Vil, but parody doesn't neutralize the content. Burns' plan involves killing baby animals. And when Bart and Lisa discover his scheme and confront him, the episode includes a scene where Burns contemplates killing the children as well to keep his plan secret. The show pulls back from actually having Burns murder 2 children, but the fact that it goes far enough to have Burns consider it, to have the characters genuinely in danger from a man who is planning to skin puppies alive, is one of the moments where the show's darkness overwhelmed its comedy. And then there's Bart Sells His Soul, Season 7, Episode 4. The premise is deceptively simple. Bart sells his soul to Milhouse for $5. He doesn't believe in the soul. He thinks it's a joke. He sells it as casually as he would trade a baseball card. And then strange things start happening. The automatic doors at the Quickie Mart stop opening for Bart. Animals react to him with hostility. His cat hisses at him. And he begins having nightmares. In the nightmare, everyone Bart knows is rowing a canoe across a river. Each person has their soul beside them in the canoe, a glowing, smiling version of themselves. They row toward a golden shore. Bart is in his canoe alone. He has no soul. He tries to row, but the canoe doesn't move. He watches everyone he loves disappear into the distance, and he is left behind, alone, on dark water, unable to follow. That image, a 10-year-old boy abandoned by everyone he knows because he sold something he didn't believe was real, is one of the most psychologically disturbing things The Simpsons has ever put on screen. It's a scene that lodges in your memory, especially if you saw it as a child and stays there for years, because the show doesn't answer the question. It doesn't tell you whether Bart's soul is real or whether the strange events are coincidence or psychosomatic. It leaves you in the ambiguity. It leaves you wondering whether something essential has been lost and whether it can ever come back. Let me keep going because the catalog runs deeper than most people realize. Some Enchanted Evening, Season 1, Episode 13. This is the very last episode of the first season, and it contains a storyline that, if you watched it as a child, probably stuck with you in a way you didn't fully understand at the time. Homer and Marge hire a babysitter to watch the kids while they go out for the evening. The babysitter's name is Ms. Botts. She seems nice. She seems responsible. And then, once the parents leave, she reveals herself to be a wanted criminal known as the Babysitter Bandit. Ms. Botts ties up Bart and Lisa. She gags them. She cuts the phone line so the children have no way to contact their parents or call for help. And then she begins ransacking the house, stealing everything of value while the children sit bound and helpless in the living room. This is a home invasion episode in a family comedy. In its first season, the children are in genuine danger. The threat is not a cartoon villain or a supernatural force. It's a real human being who has restrained children and is robbing their home. The episode resolves when the kids escape and subdue Ms. Botts, but the resolution doesn't erase what preceded it. 2 children were tied up by a criminal in their own home, and the fear in that scenario is not cartoon fear. It's the kind of fear that real children experience in real situations, depicted in a show that many children were watching. Then there's My Sister, My Sitter, Season 8. Lisa takes on babysitting as a way to earn money, and she's hired to watch Bart while Homer and Marge are out. What begins as a standard Simpsons setup becomes one of the show's most genuinely disturbing storylines. Bart, resentful at being babysat by his younger sister, refuses to cooperate. He deliberately provokes Lisa. He escalates his misbehavior until a confrontation results in Bart falling down the stairs and being knocked unconscious. Here's where the episode gets dark. Rather than call for help, rather than phone an ambulance or a parent or a neighbor, Lisa panics and tries to handle the situation herself. She puts Bart's unconscious body into a wheelbarrow alongside Maggie, who is in a pet carrier. She drags them through the streets of Springfield, trying to get Bart to a hospital. Bart falls out of the wheelbarrow. He tumbles down a muddy hill. Lisa, Maggie, and the wheelbarrow follow. And when they land at the bottom, visible to the crowd at a nearby event, the scene that greets the spectators is this. Bart appears to be dead, Lisa appears to be on drugs, and Maggie appears to be about to be drowned. The episode's final act is a nightmare of misinterpretation and public humiliation, staged as comedy. A little girl desperately trying to save her brother is perceived by the public as a killer, an addict, and a threat to her baby sister. The imagery is so bleak, so far removed from the show's usual comedic register, that it lingers in the memory like a fever dream. And then there's the blunder years. Season 13, Homer undergoes hypnosis, and it awakens a repressed childhood trauma. The memory comes flooding back in pieces. When Homer was a boy, he and his friends went swimming at the quarry. The water pipe was blocked, Homer unblocked it, and a rotting human corpse washed out of the pipe directly into young Homer's lap. A dead body on top of a child in the water he was swimming in. The corpse turns out to be Waylon Smithers Sr., the father of Burns's assistant, who died heroically by sacrificing himself to prevent a meltdown at the nuclear power plant. But the manner of the reveal, a decomposing body washing over a small boy, is one of the most viscerally horrifying images the show has ever produced. And the fact that it happens not in a Treehouse of Horror episode, not in a Halloween special, but in a regular canonical episode, demonstrates how casual the show became about deploying genuinely disturbing imagery without the safety net of a non-canon framing device. Then there's Sideshow Bob. Sideshow Bob is one of the show's most beloved recurring antagonists, voiced by Kelsey Grammer, and his entire character arc is built on a single premise. He wants to murder a 10-year-old child. That's his motivation. That's his driving purpose. He was introduced as a criminal who framed Krusty the Clown, but his character was quickly defined by his obsessive desire to kill Bart Simpson. He has attempted to murder Bart in multiple episodes across multiple seasons. In Cape Fear, one of the show's most acclaimed episodes, Bob stalks Bart with such intensity and dedication that the Simpson family is placed in federal witness protection. They are given new identities, they are relocated to a houseboat, and Bob finds them anyway. He ties up the entire family and prepares to kill Bart on the deck of the boat. The episode is a parody of the 1991 film Cape Fear, which was itself a remake of a 1962 thriller. The comedy is brilliant, the references are sharp, the execution is masterful, and the underlying premise is that a grown man is trying to murder a child and has been trying to murder that child for years, and will continue trying to murder that child for decades to come. Sideshow Bob has been attempting to kill Bart Simpson since 1993. That is over 30 years of a fictional adult stalking a fictional child with the explicit intent of ending his life. The show plays it as a comedic rivalry. The reality underneath the comedy is a sustained depiction of violence against a minor that has been normalized through repetition and recontextualized through humor. And there's one more that deserves attention because it demonstrates how casually the show handled a topic that, in any other context, would be treated with gravity. Artie Ziff. In the episode The Way We Was, a flashback to Homer and Marge's high school years, the audience is introduced to Artie Ziff, Marge's prom date. After the prom, Artie drives Marge to a secluded spot, and he attempts to assault her. The scene is brief. Marge fights him off. She leaves the car, she walks home in the rain, and she finds Homer's prom corsage still on the doorstep, a symbol of the decent man she could have been with instead. The scene is played not for horror, but for narrative contrast. Artie is bad. Homer is good. The assault is a plot device, a mechanism for showing the audience why Marge chose Homer. And in subsequent episodes, Artie returns. He comes back as a comedy character. He is played for laughs. He even forcibly kisses Marge again in a later episode, and nobody addresses it. In one episode, Artie is revealed to be living in the Simpsons' attic, and Homer invites him to stay, apparently unbothered by the fact that this man assaulted his wife. The show treats Artie's assault of Marge as a historical footnote, a character quirk, something that happened a long time ago and doesn't need to be reckoned with because time has passed and the story has moved on. These are the moments that accumulate over 36 seasons. Individually, each one can be explained. Each one has context. Each one was the product of specific creative decisions made by specific writers working under specific constraints. But collectively, they form a pattern. The Simpsons has always been willing to go to dark places. That's part of what makes it great. But the darkness has a cost. And the cost is measured in the moments where the audience stops laughing and starts wondering whether anyone in the writer's room asked if this was a good idea. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. And two more deserve mention before we move on. The Banksy couch gag from season 22 depicted the animation production process as a sweatshop nightmare. The sequence showed Asian workers in appalling conditions, manufacturing Simpsons merchandise while toxic waste poured into the streets around them. The imagery was so extreme that Fox's Standards and Practices Department demanded changes before it could air. Executive producer Al Jean agreed to modify approximately 5% of the sequence for taste, though he declined to specify what was cut. The final version that aired was still one of the most disturbing things the show had ever broadcast. The gag wasn't just dark comedy, it was an indictment of the global supply chain that produces the merchandise the show profits from, delivered inside the show itself during its own opening credits. Nelson Shin, founder of ACOM, the Korean animation studio that actually produces The Simpsons, protested the sequence, saying it suggested his staff worked in sweatshops when they actually worked in high-tech workshops. The Simpsons went too far by telling a version of the truth about its own industry, and the real workers who make the show were the ones who objected. And then there's Lisa Goes Gaga, Season 23, Episode 22. Aired May 20th, 2012. It holds the dubious distinction of being the lowest rated episode in the show's history on IMDb, sitting at approximately 3.9 to 4.5 out of 10. The episode sees Lisa voted Springfield Elementary's least popular student. Lady Gaga arrives to help. The episode was criticized for being a thinly disguised promotional vehicle for a pop star, for sidelining the show's own characters in favor of a celebrity guest, and for treating Lisa's humiliation as a setup for someone else's heroism. It went too far not in darkness, but in abandoning its own identity. The show that once mocked celebrity culture had become celebrity culture. The show that once satirized commercialism had become a commercial. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the times. The Simpsons didn't just offend its own audience, it offended entire countries. And in at least one case, the country in question threatened to sue. The Simpsons has always used travel episodes as opportunities for the broadest possible cultural satire. When the Simpson family leaves Springfield, the jokes get bigger, the stereotypes get louder, and the cultural commentary gets blunter. Sometimes this works. The show has produced genuinely clever episodes about the Simpson family navigating unfamiliar environments, finding comedy in the gap between their small-town, American perspective and the complexity of the wider world. But sometimes the show doesn't navigate that gap. Sometimes it falls straight into it, and the countries on the other side of the gap have not always been amused. The most infamous example is Blame It on Lisa, Season 13. The episode involves Lisa revealing that she has been sponsoring a young Brazilian boy named Ronaldo through an international charity. When Ronaldo goes missing, the Simpson family travels to Rio de Janeiro to find him. The premise is innocuous. The execution was anything but. The episode depicted Brazil as a country overrun by street crime, kidnapping, slums, rat infestations, and general chaos. Homer is kidnapped by a taxi driver almost immediately upon arriving. The family is mugged. They encounter monkeys running through the streets. The Rio that The Simpsons depicted was not a real place. It was a cartoon version of every negative stereotype about South America that American audiences had absorbed through decades of careless media coverage. The reaction from Brazil was swift and furious. Rio's tourism board condemned the episode. Government officials publicly criticized Fox. The Brazilian government formally protested the episode's portrayal of the country, arguing that it reinforced harmful stereotypes that damaged Brazil's international reputation and its tourism industry. The backlash was significant enough that the episode was temporarily pulled from broadcast in Brazil. The show's response was characteristically dismissive. James L. Brooks reportedly quipped that he was offended by the episode's depiction of Brazil because he'd been to Brazil, and the country was much more beautiful than the show portrayed. The humor was noted. It was not appreciated because the people protesting weren't upset about the quality of the animation. They were upset that the most watched cartoon in the world had reduced their country to a punchline about crime and poverty, and that millions of American viewers would absorb that caricature as their primary frame of reference for an entire nation. The episode also made a factual cultural error that deepened the insult. Several Brazilian characters in the episode were given Spanish accents. Brazil is a Portuguese-speaking country. The show's writers either didn't know or didn't care enough to get the basic linguistic identity of a country of 200 million people correct. When you're already being accused of cultural insensitivity, giving your Brazilian characters the wrong language is the kind of detail that transforms a clumsy episode into an insulting one. Then there's 30 Minutes Over Tokyo, Season 10, Episode 23. The Simpson family wins a trip to Japan. The episode deploys every Japanese stereotype in the American playbook. Game shows involving physical torture. Seizure-inducing television, a direct reference to the 1997 incident where an episode of Pokémon caused seizures in hundreds of Japanese children. A real event in which real children were hospitalized being turned into a punchline. Sumo wrestling played for maximum cultural reduction. The episode treats Japanese culture as a theme park for American comedy, flattening centuries of tradition and complexity into a 22-minute highlight reel of the most cartoonish images American audiences would recognize. The episode aired in 1999. Its Japan was not the Japan of Kurosawa or Murakami, or the economic miracle or the technological innovation that was reshaping the global economy. Its Japan was the Japan of American ignorance, the Japan that existed in the minds of people who had never been there and whose entire frame of reference was built on other American media that had already gotten it wrong. And then there's The City of New York versus Homer Simpson, Season 9, Episode 1. This one is different from the others because the controversy wasn't about what the show depicted. It was about what happened afterward. The episode aired on September 21st, 1997. It follows Homer as he travels to New York City to retrieve his car, which has been illegally parked between the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. The episode features the Twin Towers prominently throughout. Homer stands between them. He interacts with people inside them. The towers are a central visual element of the entire episode, looming over the comedy like two massive pillars of the New York skyline. 4 years after the episode aired, on September 11th, 2001, the Twin Towers were destroyed. Nearly 3, a short 0 people died, and suddenly an episode of The Simpsons that used the World Trade Center as a comedic backdrop became unwatchable for an enormous portion of the American audience. Not because the show had done anything wrong, not because the episode was offensive, but because history had transformed the context of every frame, every joke, every shot of those towers into something that could no longer be received as entertainment. The episode was pulled from syndication after September 11th. It was removed from rotation for years. Networks and syndicators decided that airing an episode featuring the World Trade Center as a lighthearted backdrop was inappropriate in the aftermath of the worst terrorist attack in American history. The episode was eventually restored to rotation, but its removal represented something unique in the show's history, an episode that went too far not because of anything the show did, but because reality went too far and the show was caught in the blast radius. The City of New York versus Homer Simpson is a reminder that The Simpsons exists in the real world, that its jokes don't occur in a vacuum, that the cultural artifacts it creates can be transformed overnight by events the writers never anticipated. The episode was innocent when it aired. It became painful after September 11th. And its temporary removal was an acknowledgement that even a cartoon has to reckon with the world it exists in. These international incidents share a common thread. In each case, The Simpsons treated another culture as raw material for comedy, extracting the broadest possible caricature from a complex reality and serving it to an American audience that lacked the context to recognize the distortion. When the audience was American, the jokes landed because the audience shared the show's perspective. When the audience was the culture being depicted, the jokes landed differently. The show's defenders will argue that The Simpsons satirizes American culture just as harshly, that Springfield is itself a savage parody of small-town America, that the show has spent 36 years mocking every aspect of American life with the same broad brush it applies to other countries. And this is true. The Simpsons is merciless toward America. It always has been. But there's a difference between a show satirizing its own culture from the inside and a show satirizing someone else's culture from the outside. The former is self-criticism, the latter is caricature. And when the caricature is broadcast to hundreds of millions of people in dozens of countries around the world, when it becomes for many viewers the primary representation of that country they will ever encounter, the responsibility changes, the stakes change, and the excuse that it's just a cartoon stops being sufficient. The Simpsons didn't set out to offend Brazil or Japan or anyone else, but it also didn't set out to be careful. And when you're the longest running, most widely distributed, most culturally influential animated show in the history of television, not being careful is a form of going too far. Because the reach of the show amplifies everything, including its mistakes. A joke about Rio on a less popular show reaches a few million people and fades from memory. The same joke on The Simpsons reaches hundreds of millions of people across the planet and becomes part of how the world understands Rio. That's power, and with power comes responsibility that The Simpsons hasn't always been willing to acknowledge. The countries The Simpsons offended aren't holding grudges. The diplomatic incidents faded, the protests subsided, the episodes are back in rotation, but the images linger, the caricatures persist. And somewhere in the collective unconscious of American pop culture, there's a version of Brazil that has more to do with a Simpsons episode from 2002 than with any actual experience of Brazilian life. That's the cost of going too far when you're the biggest show in the world. The damage doesn't stay on screen. It seeps into the culture and becomes invisible, so familiar that nobody questions it anymore. And that invisibility is the most dangerous thing of all. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the violence that the show made so normal, so routine, so deeply embedded in its comedic DNA that most of us forgot to question it. The structural cruelty that runs through every season of The Simpsons like a spine. The thing the show does so constantly, so casually, so cheerfully that it takes an outside perspective to even recognize it as what it is. Homer Simpson strangles his son. Not once, not in a special episode, not as a dramatic beat in a very special storyline about anger management or domestic violence. Homer strangles Bart as a recurring gag. It happens hundreds of times across 36 seasons. The trigger is always the same. Bart does something that annoys or embarrasses Homer. Homer grabs Bart by the throat with both hands. He lifts the boy off the ground. He shakes him. Bart's face turns colors. His eyes bulge. His tongue protrudes. And usually, Homer accompanies the strangling with his catchphrase, a primal scream of frustration, before eventually releasing the boy and moving on with the scene. This has been one of the longest running gags in television history. It's been referenced in merchandise, in promotional materials, in cultural criticism, in academic papers about media and violence. It's so embedded in the show's identity that you can close your eyes and see it. The image of Homer's hands around Bart's throat is as iconic as the family sitting on the couch or Bart writing lines on the chalkboard. For decades, nobody questioned it. The gag existed in the same universe as Itchy and Scratchy, the show within the show, a cartoon about a cat and mouse engaged in ultra-violent slapstick that was itself a parody of Tom and Jerry. The Simpsons was always self-aware about animated violence. It satirized it, it commented on it. It used Itchy and Scratchy as a running meta-commentary about the relationship between fictional violence and real-world behavior. The audience understood that when Homer strangled Bart, it was cartoon violence, not a depiction of child abuse. The physics of the show supported this reading. Bart never had lasting injuries. The strangling never escalated into something more severe. The show's universe operated on rules where physical comedy existed in a consequence-free zone, but rules change, cultural context shifts. And in 2024, a conversation began that the show had been avoiding for decades. A season 35 episode appeared to reference the strangling gag in a way that suggested it might be retired. The internet erupted with speculation. Was The Simpsons finally acknowledging that a father strangling his son, even in a cartoon, even as a gag, even in a universe where nobody suffers permanent consequences, was something the show should move past? Executive producer James L. Brooks shut the speculation down immediately. His response was 6 words. Don't think for a second we're changing anything. That response tells you everything you need to know about The Simpsons' relationship with its own boundaries. The show has been confronted with the argument that the strangling gag normalizes domestic violence. It has been asked publicly whether a father's hands around a child's throat is an appropriate source of comedy in an era of heightened awareness about child abuse. And the show's response was not to engage with the question, not to consider the argument on its merits, not to evolve the way it evolved on Apu or on the casting of non-white characters. The response was, we're not changing. And maybe that's the honest answer. Maybe The Simpsons has decided that the strangling gag is grandfathered in, that it's been part of the show for so long and is so deeply associated with Homer and Bart's dynamic that removing it would be a betrayal of the show's identity. Maybe the creative team has weighed the criticism against the tradition and concluded that the gag belongs to the show's particular brand of comedy and should not be sacrificed to contemporary sensitivity. But the argument against the gag isn't about sensitivity. It's about what the show chooses to normalize. Because the strangling gag doesn't exist in isolation, it exists within a show that has spent 36 seasons depicting Homer as a fundamentally good man, a loving father, a flawed but decent human being whose heart is in the right place even when his brain isn't. And within that framework, the strangling is presented as an expression of frustration, a harmless outlet, a comedic beat that tells you Homer is annoyed but that everything will be fine in 30 seconds. That framing normalizes the act, not the severity of it, but the structure of it. The idea that a parent can physically assault a child in a moment of frustration and that it means nothing, that it carries no weight, that it's just something dads do when kids are annoying. That framing has been broadcast to billions of people for 3.5 decades. And even if the vast majority of those people understand it as cartoon comedy, even if nobody watches Homer strangle Bart and then goes and does it to their own child, the image becomes part of the cultural vocabulary. The hands around the throat, the primal scream, the release, the reset, the normalcy that follows. And this connects to something larger about how The Simpsons handles consequences, or rather, how it doesn't. Homer doesn't just strangle Bart without consequence. Homer does everything without consequence. He caused Maude Flanders' death and was never held accountable. He has been directly responsible for nuclear near misses at his workplace and has never been fired permanently. He has driven drunk, committed assault, engaged in fraud, endangered his family countless times, and every single time the episode ends and the slate is wiped clean. This is the fundamental structure of The Simpsons. It's the engine that makes the show possible. Without the reset, without the erasure of consequences, the show can't continue. Homer would be in prison, Springfield would be a Superfund site, the Simpson family would have been destroyed by trauma 100 times over. The floating timeline, the episodic reset, the collective amnesia, all of it exists to preserve the status quo, to keep the family on the couch, to keep the show on the air. But preserving the status quo means preserving everything about it, including the violence, including the negligence, including the strangling. The show can't evolve its characters because evolution would break the loop. Homer can't learn to control his temper because a Homer who controls his temper is a Homer who doesn't strangle Bart. And a Homer who doesn't strangle Bart is a Homer the audience might not recognize. The gag is the character is the show. And the show can't change because changing means ending, so the strangling continues. And James L. Brooks says, "Don't think for a second we're changing anything." And the audience laughs because the audience has always laughed. And somewhere in the background of every episode, the violence sits there, normalized, unremarked upon, as permanent and unremarkable as the yellow skin, and the four fingers, and the overbites, and every other impossible thing about Springfield that we accepted decades ago and never questioned again. The Simpsons didn't go too far with the strangling gag. It went exactly as far as it always goes. The problem is that it's been going exactly that far for 36 years without ever pulling back. And in 36 years, the world changed around it while the show stayed still. The strangling that was unremarkable in 1990 is uncomfortable in 2025, not because the gag changed, because we did. And The Simpsons, the show that freezes its characters in place and refuses to let them grow, has frozen this too. The violence is as permanent as the timeline. And neither one is going anywhere. The structural cruelty of The Simpsons goes beyond any single gag. It's in the way the show treats its female characters as emotional support systems, who exist primarily to manage the chaos created by the men. It's in the way the show uses Lisa's intelligence as a source of isolation, punishing her for being smart in a world that doesn't value intelligence. It's in the way the show kills, injures, humiliates, and degrades Hans Moleman episode after episode, using a tiny elderly man as a disposable body count that nobody mourns. It's in the way Ned Flanders, the kindest man in Springfield, is punished relentlessly by a universe that seems to reward selfishness and punish decency with the consistency of a natural law. Let's stay with Ned for a moment, because what the show has done to Ned Flanders over 36 seasons might be the quietest, most sustained cruelty in the entire series. And unlike the Panda scene or the Boys of Bummer, it doesn't announce itself as dark. It accumulates in the background, episode by episode, year by year, until one day you look at Ned's life and realize the show has systematically destroyed everything this man cared about while using his own goodness as the mechanism of his destruction. On the surface, Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. He's kind, he's generous, he's physically fit, he's financially responsible, he's a devoted father, he's a devout Christian, he's a good neighbor who lends his tools, who watches Homer's children, who forgives every insult, every act of negligence, every stolen barbecue grill and returned broken lawnmower. Ned is, by any standard you'd use to measure a human being, a good man, a genuinely good man in a town that does not reward goodness. His wife was killed because of Homer. We discussed this earlier. Maude died at the Springfield Speedway because Homer ducked to pick up a bobby pin and the t-shirt cannon hit Maude instead. Homer's selfishness caused the death of Ned's wife, and Ned forgave him. Not because he wanted to, not because it was easy, because Ned's entire psychological architecture is built on forgiveness. He cannot hold a grudge, he cannot sustain anger, he cannot direct fury at the man who took his wife from him because his brain will not allow it. And this is where the show's own lore makes Ned's story genuinely unsettling. The episode Hurricane Nettie, which aired in Season 8, reveals the origin of Ned's relentless niceness. Ned was not born kind. As a child, he was violent, uncontrollable, aggressive. His parents, who were beatniks, didn't believe in discipline. They couldn't manage him. They took him to a psychiatrist named Dr. Foster, who administered something the show calls the University of Minnesota Spankological Protocol. The treatment involved 8 months of continuous spanking. That is what the show depicts. A child being spanked nonstop for 8 months until the aggression was physically beaten out of him. 8 months. They spent 8 months physically dismantling a child's natural capacity for anger and replacing it with a compulsive need to be pleasant. Ned's kindness isn't a personality trait. It's a psychological cage. It's the result of a medical intervention that was performed on a child who was too young to consent to it. Every time Ned turns the other cheek, every time he absorbs an insult, every time he forgives Homer for something that would enrage any reasonable human being, He isn't demonstrating virtue. He's demonstrating the effectiveness of his conditioning. He's performing the program that was installed in his brain before he was old enough to understand what was being taken from him. The show reveals this in an episode where the conditioning fails. After a hurricane destroys Ned's house, the community rebuilds it, but does such a terrible job that the new house collapses immediately. Ned snaps. He has a complete psychological breakdown. He screams at the town. He insults everyone who has ever wronged him. He lets out decades of suppressed rage in a single torrential outburst, and then he's institutionalized. He's committed to a mental health facility where the same doctor who conditioned him as a child restores the programming. The anger is suppressed again, the smile returns, and Ned goes home, repaired, reset, ready to be punished again. The show played this for comedy. It's a funny episode. Homer's line about Ned being one of the few people he doesn't hate is a classic. But underneath the comedy, the show depicted a man having a genuine psychological crisis triggered by a lifetime of suppressing his natural emotions, and the resolution was not therapy, not growth, not the development of healthy coping mechanisms. The resolution was to put the cage back on, to reinstall the program, to take a man who had finally broken free from his conditioning and condition him again. And then the universe kept punishing him. Maud was killed, his house was destroyed. His faith was tested over and over by a God who, within the show's own continuity, exists and has spoken to Homer on multiple occasions but has never spoken to Ned. Think about that. God talks to Homer Simpson, the drunk, the glutton, the negligent father who sleeps through church. God appears to Homer, has conversations with Homer, tells Homer the meaning of life. And Ned Flanders, the man who has dedicated his entire existence to faith, who goes to church every Sunday, who reads the Bible, who prays without ceasing, who lives his life in accordance with every principle his religion teaches, Ned gets nothing. Silence. God does not appear to Ned. God does not speak to Ned. God does not reward Ned's devotion with a single acknowledgement. The show never addresses this discrepancy directly. It sits there in the background, accumulating weight. The devout man is ignored. The sinner is favored. The system that Ned believes in, the cosmic moral framework that justifies his suffering and gives meaning to his loss, doesn't work the way he thinks it does. And Ned can never figure this out because the conditioning won't let him. The program that keeps him kind also keeps him blind. He can't question his faith because questioning is a form of anger, and anger has been removed from his repertoire. Ned Flanders isn't a background character. He's the show's thesis statement about goodness in an unjust system. He proves that doing everything right doesn't protect you, that kindness isn't rewarded, that faith isn't answered, that the universe of The Simpsons, like the universe outside it, doesn't care about moral behavior. It cares about survival. And survival in Springfield doesn't require virtue. It requires compliance. And Ned is the most compliant man in the history of American fiction. Now let's look at Moe. Because if Ned represents the cruelty of the show's moral universe, Moe Zyslak represents something even harder to watch, the cruelty of the show's comedic universe. Moe is Homer's bartender and nominally his friend. He is ugly. The show makes this explicit. Characters comment on his appearance regularly. He is lonely. He lives alone. He has never maintained a long-term romantic relationship. He is depressed. And the show has used his depression and his loneliness and his desire to die as recurring punchlines for decades. Moe has attempted suicide on screen multiple times. He has held a gun to his head. He has written suicide notes. He has described wanting to end his life in terms that, if they came from a real person, would trigger immediate intervention. And the show plays these moments for laughs. They are structured as jokes. The setup is Moe's misery. The punchline is that his misery is permanent and escape is impossible. The audience laughs because the delivery is funny and the character is fictional, and the show has trained us over 36 years to understand that nothing in Springfield has consequences. But the content of the joke is a man who wants to die. And the frequency of the joke means the show returns to this well again and again, using a character's suicidal ideation as a reliable comedy beat, a dependable source of dark humor that requires no setup because the audience already knows Moe is miserable. The show has made depression into a character trait and turned that character trait into a punchline. and it has been doing this for so long that nobody questions it anymore. Moe's suicidal tendencies are treated with the same casual indifference that the show applies to everything else. Homer's violence, Bart's trauma, Ned's conditioning, the nuclear plant's contamination. None of it matters because none of it persists. The episode ends, the slate is wiped. And next week, Moe is behind the bar again, serving Homer another beer, making another joke about wanting to die. And the audience laughs again because that's what the show has taught us to do. And then there's Hans Moleman. We need to talk about Moleman because his treatment is so extreme, so sustained, and so completely accepted by the audience that it has become invisible. Moleman is a tiny, elderly, nearly blind man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes and exists, as far as the show is concerned, to be destroyed. He gets hit by cars, he gets crushed by falling objects, he gets buried alive, he gets eaten, he gets incinerated, he is struck by lightning. He is, by any reasonable count, the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. Moleman has died dozens of times in canonical episodes, not in Treehouse of Horror specials, not in dream sequences, in regular episodes. He dies and then he appears in the next episode completely fine. No resurrection scene, no explanation. He just returns, ready to be killed again, in an endless loop of death and renewal that the show treats as ambient noise. The show once had Moleman state his age as 31 years old. Look at him. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s. If he's telling the truth, something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man in his prime and turned him into a walking corpse decades ahead of schedule. And that same something made him nearly indestructible, able to return from fatal injuries that would permanently end any other character. Moleman doesn't survive his deaths the way Homer survives injuries. Homer endures damage and heals. Moleman actually dies. His body ceases to function. And then he comes back as if death in Springfield is a temporary condition for certain residents. The audience doesn't question this because the audience has been trained not to question it. Moleman dies, that's the joke. The joke doesn't require context or setup or resolution. It requires a tiny old man to be destroyed in a novel way, and then it requires the show to move on as if nothing happened. The cruelty is the joke. The repetition is the joke. The fact that nobody cares is the joke. And that's the structural cruelty of The Simpsons in its most distilled form. The show doesn't go too far in a single moment. It goes too far by making cruelty routine, by normalizing it through repetition, by training its audience to laugh at things that, in any other context, would be horrifying. A father strangling his son, a town driving a child to suicide, a man wanting to die and nobody helping, an old man killed over and over and nobody mourning, a good man conditioned into compliance and nobody questioning it, a woman assaulted by someone she knows and nobody addressing it. These patterns aren't bugs, they're features. They're built into the operating system of the show, and they've been running for so long that we don't see them anymore. They're the wallpaper. They're the background radiation. They're the three-eyed fish swimming in the river that nobody tests, because testing would mean admitting that something is wrong. The Simpsons doesn't go too far in explosive, dramatic moments. Those are the moments we notice, the moments that generate articles and debates and lists like this one. The Simpsons goes too far in the quiet, daily, structural ways that nobody talks about, because they're so fundamental to what the show is, that questioning them feels like questioning the show's right to exist. And there's one more form of going too far that we haven't addressed yet. The show went too far with its own legacy. Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper, aired September 28, 1997. This is the episode that many fans and even the show's own creator consider the moment The Simpsons betrayed its audience. The premise is this. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Skinner's 20 years of service. During the celebration, a stranger walks in. He identifies himself as the real Seymour Skinner, a Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war and believed dead. The man Springfield has known as Skinner for 2 decades is revealed to be an imposter named Armin Tamzarian, a street punk who stole a dead man's identity out of guilt and loneliness, and has been living inside that lie for 20 years. Harry Shearer, who voices both Skinner and Mr. Burns, publicly expressed his displeasure with the storyline when he first received the script. He called it arbitrary, gratuitous, and disrespectful to the audience. Matt Groening, the show's creator, also criticized the episode. The fans despised it. It is consistently ranked among the worst episodes in the series, and it is frequently cited as the precise point where The Simpsons stopped caring about its own continuity. But the episode's true transgression isn't the reveal, it's what happens after the reveal. The town holds a vote. They decide, collectively, to reject the truth. They choose the imposter over the real Skinner. They exile the genuine war hero, tie him to a railroad car, and physically remove him from Springfield. And Judge Snyder issues a legal decree making it illegal to ever mention the truth again. The truth is criminalized. The lie is protected by law. And the real Seymour Skinner is sent away, banished from his own identity, by a community that preferred the comfortable fiction. The episode went too far because it showed the audience exactly how Springfield maintains its impossible reality, through collective denial, through the systematic suppression of inconvenient truths, through the deliberate choice to preserve a lie when the truth threatens the status quo. Every time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, ignores a contradiction, or resets to normal after something world-changing happens, this is the mechanism. The town votes. The truth is expelled. And anyone who insists on remembering gets tied to a train. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the show's greatest act of going too far isn't any single episode or scene. Maybe it's the show itself. The idea that a family can exist in stasis for 36 years, that a town can absorb every disaster and reset to normal by the following week, that a father can strangle his son and it can mean nothing, that a community can drive a child to attempt suicide and forget about it by the next episode. Maybe the most transgressive thing The Simpsons has ever done is convince us that all of this is normal. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the question that no one inside The Simpsons has ever been able to answer. How does a show survive all of this? How does a show cross every line, offend every group, erase its own history, degrade its own characters, and still come back every single week to 200 million streaming viewers as if nothing happened? The Simpsons has been renewed through season 40. That's not a typo, season 40. The show that premiered on December 17th, 1989, the show that was controversial before most of its current audience was born, the show that has weathered every scandal we've discussed tonight and dozens we haven't, is contractually guaranteed to continue producing new episodes into the foreseeable future. In December 2025, Disney announced that The Simpsons surpassed 1 billion hours of streaming on Disney Plus in a single calendar year. That's not a number that makes sense when you say it out loud. 1 billion hours. That's approximately 114,000 years of continuous viewing time, all consumed in 12 months, all for a show that first aired when the Berlin Wall was still standing. To put the show's durability in context, here is a partial list of things that have begun and ended during The Simpsons' run. The entire Soviet Union, the entire War on Terror, 6 presidential administrations, the rise and fall of MySpace, Vine, and the original iteration of Twitter, the complete life cycle of the DVD format, from introduction to obsolescence, 3 separate Star Wars trilogies, the birth, adolescence, and adulthood of an entire generation of human beings who are now older than Homer and Marge were when the show debuted. The Simpsons has outlasted every competitor, every imitator, every cultural shift, and every controversy that should have killed it. And the question is not how did it last this long? The question is why has nothing we discussed tonight, nothing it has done, no line it has crossed, no country it has offended, no character it has degraded, no episode it has erased, none of it, not a single thing, has had any material impact on the show's survival. Let's start with what didn't happen. After the Apu controversy, the show wasn't canceled. It wasn't boycotted in any sustained way. Hank Azaria stepped back from the role, the character was quietly phased out, and viewership continued at roughly the same level it had been at before the controversy began. The show absorbed the criticism, made a change, and kept going. After The Boys of Bummer aired, with its depiction of a child being driven to a suicide attempt by his own community, the show wasn't placed under content review. It wasn't forced to add mental health disclaimers. It wasn't penalized by the network or the sponsors. The episode aired, it was hated by fans, and the show continued producing new episodes the following week without interruption. After Homer versus Dignity, after the panda scene that was supposed to be the moment the show jumped the shark, The Simpsons produced 25 more seasons. 25. That's not survival, that's domination. That's a show so deeply embedded in the infrastructure of American entertainment that it can sustain damage that would destroy any other program and continue operating at full capacity. After Stark Raving Dad was erased, after the show demonstrated that it was willing to retroactively delete part of its own history, nobody boycotted Disney Plus over the removal. Nobody organized campaigns against the show for pretending an episode never existed. The erasure was noted, debated on the internet for a few weeks, and then absorbed into the general understanding of what The Simpsons is and how it operates. The pattern is the same every time. The Simpsons crosses a line, the audience reacts, the reaction generates attention. The attention fades, the show continues, the loop resets, and the next episode airs on schedule, the same family on the same couch, as if nothing happened. This isn't unique to The Simpsons. It's the way all institutions operate when they become too big to fail. And The Simpsons is, in every meaningful sense, too big to fail. Its library is too valuable. Its merchandise revenue is too significant. Its brand recognition is too universal. Its cultural footprint is too deep. The Simpsons isn't just a show anymore. It's a revenue stream, a content library, a marketing platform, a cross-promotional vehicle, and a cultural institution that generates value simply by existing. Canceling The Simpsons would cost Disney hundreds of millions of dollars in catalog value, streaming content, licensing revenue, and brand equity. No controversy we've discussed tonight comes close to justifying that kind of financial loss. The Simpsons survives because the economics of its survival are more powerful than the ethics of its transgressions. It's not that the show's mistakes don't matter, it's that they don't matter enough. Not enough to move the needle on a billion-hour streaming juggernaut. Not enough to threaten a franchise that has been generating revenue for 3.5 decades. Not enough to overcome the institutional inertia of a show that has become part of the basic infrastructure of American pop culture. And there's a deeper reason too, a reason that goes beyond economics and into something more uncomfortable. The Simpsons survives because the audience forgives it. Not reluctantly, not grudgingly, eagerly. The audience wants to forgive The Simpsons because forgiving The Simpsons means not having to give it up. And giving up The Simpsons, truly walking away from a show that has been part of your life for longer than most relationships, most careers, most cities you've lived in, that's not a decision people make over a controversial episode. That's not a calculation most viewers are willing to make. The show knows this. It has always known this. The Simpsons operates with the confidence of a show that understands its audience will always come back. It pushes boundaries because it knows the boundaries are elastic. It crosses lines because it knows the lines will be redrawn to accommodate whatever it did. It erases episodes and degrades characters and offends nations because the cost of these actions, measured in actual viewership, actual revenue, actual cultural capital, is always less than the benefit of continuing to take risks. And here's where this connects to everything we've discussed tonight. Every theory about Springfield, every analysis of the show's structural cruelty, every catalog of its transgressions, all of it comes back to the same fundamental insight. The Simpsons operates in a universe without consequences. Not just for its characters, for the show itself. Homer strangles Bart, and nothing happens. The show depicts a child's suicide attempt, and nothing happens. The show offends an entire nation, and nothing happens. The show erases an episode from existence, and nothing happens. The pattern is the same at every level, from the fiction to the reality. Actions without consequences, transgressions without accountability. Lines crossed and then redrawn as if they were never there. The Simpsons isn't immune to criticism, it receives criticism constantly. What it's immune to is consequence. The gap between those two things, between being criticized and being held accountable, is the space in which the show has operated for its entire existence. And that gap has only grown wider as the show has become more entrenched, more valuable, more integral to the business model of its parent company. In Springfield, the nuclear power plant keeps leaking because nobody has the power to shut it down. The economy depends on it, the town depends on it. The billionaire who owns it is too wealthy and too connected to be challenged. And the people who live downwind of the contamination have been breathing it for so long that they've forgotten what clean air smells like. The Simpsons is its own power plant. It keeps producing, keeps emitting, keeps generating content that sometimes nourishes and sometimes poisons, and nobody shuts it down because the cost of shutting it down is greater than the cost of letting it run. The audience is Springfield. We live downwind of the show. We've been watching for so long that we've forgotten what television looked like before it existed. And every time it crosses a line, we look at the three-eyed fish and we say, well, that's just how things are around here. That's not a criticism of the audience. It's a description of a relationship. A 36-year relationship between a show and the people who watch it, built on the understanding that the show will occasionally go too far and the audience will occasionally object, and neither party will ever seriously consider ending the arrangement. It's a marriage. A long, complicated, dysfunctional marriage where both sides have hurt each other, and neither side can imagine life alone. The Simpsons can't be killed because we won't let it die, and it keeps going too far because we keep letting it come back. The show and its audience are locked in the same loop, the same reset, the same eternal present that traps Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa in a town where nothing changes and nobody grows. And the beer is always cold, and the couch gag always plays, and the credits always roll, and Sunday night always comes around again. And the most remarkable thing, the thing that makes this show unlike anything else in the history of American entertainment, is that nobody wants out. Not really, not the audience, not the creators, not the network, not the streaming platform, not the sponsors, not the critics, not even the people who have spent the last 2 hours listening to a detailed accounting of every terrible thing the show has ever done, because the terrible things are part of it. They're woven into the same fabric as the brilliant things, the moving things, the things that made you laugh until you cried, the things that made you see the world differently, the things that you quote to your friends and reference at dinner parties and think about at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep. The Simpsons is all of it. The genius and the cruelty, the warmth and the darkness, the best comedy ever written and the worst decisions ever made by the people who wrote it. You don't get to separate them, you don't get to keep the golden age and discard the panda scene. You don't get to love Homer and ignore what Homer does. It's all one show, it's all one Springfield. And Springfield, for better and for worse, is home. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the final section, the part that ties everything together. Every crossed line, every erased episode, every offended nation, every degraded character, every structural cruelty, every controversy the show absorbed and survived. All of it converging on the same question. The simplest question, the hardest question. The question that 36 seasons and 788 episodes have been quietly asking since the very first frame. Why do we accept it? Not why does The Simpsons go too far? We've answered that. It goes too far because it can. Because the economics support it. Because the audience forgives it. Because the institution is too big and too valuable and too deeply embedded in American culture to face real consequences for any creative decision, no matter how dark, no matter how cruel, no matter how offensive. The question isn't about the show. The question is about us. Why do we keep watching? Why do we keep laughing? Why do we keep streaming a show that has crossed every line we've outlined tonight and then keep coming back next Sunday as if the line was never there? And the answer to that question is the real story of The Simpsons going too far. Because the answer isn't that we don't notice. We notice. Every controversy we discussed tonight was noticed by millions of people. The panda scene was noticed. The boy's a bummer was noticed. The Apu dismissal was noticed. The strangling gag has been debated in academic journals. The international incidents generated actual diplomatic responses. People notice. People care. People write angry reviews and record response videos and organize social media campaigns and sign petitions and express their displeasure in every available medium. And then they watch the next episode. That's the pattern, not just for The Simpsons, but for Springfield. Look at how the town operates. Springfield is shown a three-eyed fish pulled from a river contaminated by the nuclear power plant, and the town watches Mr. Burns eat the fish on television, shrugs, and moves on. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody tests the water. Nobody asks the obvious question about what the same contamination is doing to the people drinking from the same source. We are Springfield. We see the three-eyed fish, the dark episode, the crossed line, the degraded character, and we watch the show eat the fish on television. We shrug, we move on, we don't conduct a follow-up study, we don't test the water, we don't ask the obvious question about what decades of consuming this content has done to our sense of what's acceptable in entertainment. The Simpsons has been on the air since 1989. If you started watching as a child, you're middle-aged now. If you started watching as a teenager, your own children might be watching. The show has spanned multiple generations of the same families, the same way Homer and Marge span multiple generations within the fiction. And across those generations, the show has been teaching its audience something, not deliberately, not through overt messaging, through accumulation, through repetition, through the slow, patient process of normalizing one thing at a time until the extraordinary becomes ordinary and the unacceptable becomes unremarkable. The show taught us that a father strangling his son is funny. It taught us that for 3 decades, and now we can't see it as anything other than a gag. The show taught us that a fictional Indian accent performed by a white man is just a character. It taught us that for 30 years, and it took a documentary and a national reckoning for us to see it as anything else. The show taught us that a child being driven to a suicide attempt by his community is a storyline that can be wrapped up in 22 minutes with a restaged baseball game. And we accepted that. We watched it and we accepted it because The Simpsons told us to, and we trust The Simpsons, and trust is a powerful thing when it's been built over 36 years. That trust is the most remarkable thing about the show, more remarkable than its longevity, more remarkable than its cultural influence, more remarkable than its billion streaming hours, or its renewal through season 40, or its status as the longest-running anything in American television history. The trust is what makes everything else possible. The trust is what allows the show to go too far and come back. The trust is what turns a controversy into a conversation, and a conversation into a memory, and a memory into something you barely remember happened by the time the next season premieres. And that trust is not misplaced. That's the thing that makes this complicated. The Simpsons has earned our trust. It earned it through hundreds of brilliant episodes, through writing so sharp and so humane that it changed what television comedy could be, through characters so well drawn and so deeply loved that they've become part of the family for millions of households around the world, through moments of genuine emotional power that land with the force of great literature. The show earned the trust, and then it spent that trust, episode by episode, controversy by controversy, crossed line by crossed line, drawing down on a reservoir of goodwill that seemed bottomless because it had been filling for so long. The reservoir isn't bottomless. It might feel that way. It might look that way. The ratings hold. The streaming numbers climb. The renewals keep coming. But somewhere underneath the numbers, somewhere in the space between what the show was and what it became, the reservoir is lower than it used to be. Not empty, maybe never empty, but lower. And the show knows it. The show has to know it, because the show is staffed by intelligent people, educated people, people who read the criticism and the commentary and the endless internet debates about when The Simpsons got bad and whether it can ever get good again. The show knows. And it keeps going, because that's what The Simpsons does. It keeps going. It processes every controversy and every criticism through the same mechanism that processes every disaster and every catastrophe within the fiction. It absorbs the shock. It distributes the impact across a structure so large and so resilient that no single blow can bring it down. And then it resets. The slate is wiped. The next episode begins. And the family is on the couch again, the same family, in the same house, in the same impossible town, frozen in time, immune to consequence, eternal. Let me take you through what we covered tonight, one more time. Not to summarize, to let it accumulate, to let the weight of it settle the way it settles across 36 years of television. We started with the show's credentials, the longest running everything, 788 episodes, renewed through season 40. 1 billion hours streamed in a single year. An institution so large that it operates by its own rules. We examined the episode the show erased from existence. Stark Raving Dad, Season 3, Episode 1. Aired September 19th, 1991, featuring Michael Jackson credited as John J. Smith. Pulled from all official distribution in 2019 following Leaving Neverland. The only episode in the show's entire history to be completely banned from every platform. Not edited, not disclaimed, erased. As if 22 minutes of television could be made to unhappen by removing it from a server. We examined Homer versus Dignity. Season 12, Episode 5. Aired November 26th, 2000, The Panda Scene. The moment a critic suggested should replace jump the shark as the universal shorthand for a show's decline. The moment Homer Simpson was sexually assaulted by an animal for a laugh, followed 3 seasons later by The Strong Arms of the MacLeod, where Homer was assaulted again, this time by his own wife, in a scene the show's creators didn't even recognize as depicting what it depicted. We examined The Boys of Bummer. Season 18, Episode 18, aired April 29, 2007, written by Michael Price. IMDb rating 5.9 out of 10. The episode where a 10-year-old boy was bullied by his entire community into attempting suicide from a water tower while a police officer told him to jump, and the crowd cheered. The episode where the town continued harassing the child in his hospital bed after the attempt. The episode where the resolution involved restaging a baseball game 78 times, a redemption that the show itself revealed, in a 60-year flash-forward, was a lie. We examined Apu, 30 years of a white actor performing an Indian accent, a documentary that named The Harm, a show that responded with a shrug, and a fourth wall break in a framed photograph. Hank Azaria stepping away in 2020. The character phased out, the Quickie Mart emptied, the problem not solved so much as abandoned. We walked through the dark catalog. Maud Flanders killed because of a pay dispute, her death pinned on Homer's selfishness. Frank Grimes driven to insanity and death by the cosmic unfairness of Homer's existence. Bart enslaved and poisoned in France in Season 1. Mr. Burns stealing puppies for fur coats and contemplating the murder of children. Bart selling his soul and being haunted by nightmares of isolation so vivid they stay with you for years. We examined the international incidents. Brazil reduced to crime and poverty and the wrong language. Japan reduced to game shows and seizure jokes. New York transformed by tragedy into something the show never intended and couldn't control. The common thread of a show that treated other cultures as raw material for American comedy and was surprised when those cultures objected. We examined the structural cruelty. Homer strangling Bart hundreds of times for 36 years, with the show's executive producer declaring in 2024 that nothing would change. The reset that erases consequences, the loop that prevents growth, the floating timeline that keeps the characters frozen in place, unable to learn from their mistakes because the show's structure won't allow mistakes to stick. And we examined the survival, the incomprehensible, seemingly paradoxical survival of a show that has done all of this and absorbed none of the consequences. Season 40, 1 billion hours. The Simpsons still on the couch, still on the air, still in Springfield, still going, always going, forever going. Now here's what all of that means when you put it together. Not as a list, not as a catalog, as a picture. As a single, unified image of what The Simpsons is when you see the whole thing at once instead of episode by episode. The Simpsons is a show about a family trapped in a town that slowly poisons them, run by a billionaire who profits from their suffering, in a community that collectively agrees to ignore every disaster because acknowledging the truth would require changing something, and change is the one thing Springfield can never do. The characters don't age, they don't grow, they don't learn, they endure the same cycle of crisis and reset, week after week, year after year, decade after decade, locked in a loop that they can't escape because the loop is the only thing keeping them alive. And the show itself is trapped in the same loop. The Simpsons can't stop producing episodes because stopping means ending, and ending means the institution dies. The writers can't evolve the characters because evolution means change, and change means the show becomes something the audience doesn't recognize. The show can't stop going too far because going too far is what generates attention, and attention is what keeps a 36-year-old show relevant in an entertainment landscape that has a shorter memory than Springfield. The show and the fiction mirror each other. The Simpsons is Springfield. The audience is the town's people. The controversies are the three-eyed fish. The network is Mr. Burns. And every time the show crosses a line, every time it goes too far, every time it does something that should generate consequences and doesn't, the loop tightens. The precedent is set. The new normal is established. And the line moves a little further out, ready to be crossed again. You might be thinking at this point that this is a takedown, that we've spent 2 hours building a case against The Simpsons, cataloging its sins, laying out the evidence for a prosecution that will end with a verdict of guilty on all counts. It's not. This is not a takedown, because you can't take down something you love. And the truth is, despite everything we've discussed tonight, despite every crossed line and every offended nation and every degraded character and every erased episode, The Simpsons is still worth loving. It is still, in its best moments, one of the greatest achievements in the history of American storytelling. It is still a show that can make you laugh until your ribs hurt, and then in the next breath make you feel something so genuine and so tender that you have to pause and remember that these are drawings. Yellow drawings on a screen, 22 minutes long, produced on a deadline, aired on a Sunday, and somehow containing more truth about the American experience than most novels and most films and most works of art that take themselves far more seriously. The Simpsons going too far is not a separate thing from The Simpsons being great. They're the same thing. The willingness to take risks is what produced the greatest episodes in television history. And the willingness to take risks is also what produced the panda scene and the Boys of Bummer and the dismissal of a 30-year stereotype with a shrug. You don't get one without the other. You don't get the brilliance without the recklessness. You don't get Homer at his most lovable without Homer at his most destructive. The show is all of it, and asking for the good parts without the bad parts is like asking for Springfield without the nuclear power plant. The plant is what runs the town. Remove it, and the lights go out. That doesn't mean the show shouldn't be held accountable. It should. Every creative decision has consequences, even if those consequences take 30 years to materialize. Every joke has an audience, and every audience includes people who are affected by what they see. Every stereotype has a real person on the other end of it, a person who has to live in a world where the caricature is more famous than the reality. Accountability matters. Context matters. The conversation about what The Simpsons has done wrong is a conversation worth having. And having it does not mean you have to stop loving the show. You can love something and hold it accountable at the same time. You can watch a show for 36 years and also acknowledge that some of those years contain things that shouldn't have been made. You can laugh at Homer and also understand that what Homer does to Bart would not be funny if it were real. You can appreciate Apu as a character and also recognize that the voice behind the character caused harm that the show was too slow to address. You can hold all of these contradictions simultaneously because that's what it means to be a fan of something complicated. And The Simpsons is the most complicated show in the history of television. If you've been with me for the last 2 hours, if you've stayed through the controversies and the dark episodes and the catalog of cruelty and the structural analysis and the economic breakdown and the existential meditation on a cartoon family that's been frozen in time since 1989, then you already know the truth about The Simpsons going too far. The truth isn't that the show is bad. The truth isn't that the show should be canceled. The truth isn't that the golden age was perfect and everything after was a mistake. The truth is that going too far is the show's nature. It has always been the show's nature. From the very first season, when it sent a 10-year-old boy to France to be enslaved and poisoned, to the most recent season, where the characters are still frozen in place and the gags are still running and the loop is still looping and nobody has aged a single day. Going too far is what The Simpsons does. It's how the show tests its boundaries. It's how the show discovers where the edges are. And sometimes, when it pushes too hard, it falls off the edge. It falls into cruelty, into insensitivity, into territory that the comedy can't justify. And then it climbs back up, and it pushes again. The show will keep going. We know this. It will produce new episodes. It will cross new lines. It will generate new controversies that we can't predict because the cultural context hasn't been invented yet. Something that is acceptable today will be unacceptable in 10 years. And The Simpsons will be there, having done that thing, having aired that episode, having made that joke, and a new generation of viewers will look back at it and ask the same question we've been asking tonight. How did they get away with this? And the answer will be the same one we arrived at. They got away with it because we let them. Because the show is too big and too loved and too important to too many people for any single transgression to bring it down. Because the reservoir of goodwill is so deep that even a lifetime of drawing on it can't drain it completely. Because The Simpsons is Springfield and we are the townspeople, and we have collectively agreed that the fiction is more important than the truth, that the comfort of the familiar is more valuable than the discomfort of accountability, and that the show must go on because the alternative, a world without The Simpsons, is something none of us are ready to imagine. The Simpsons went too far. It went too far with Stark raving dad and the panda scene, and the boys of Bummer and Apu and Brazil and the strangling gag and Maud and Grimes and 100 other moments we didn't have time to cover tonight. It went too far, and then it went further, and then it went further still. And it will keep going. And we will keep watching. And the line will keep moving. And Springfield will keep standing, impossible and eternal. A town where nothing changes and everything is forgiven. And the family on the couch never gets up because getting up would mean the show is over and the show can never be over. Sleep well. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. The nuclear plant will still be leaking. The three-eyed fish will still be swimming. Homer will still be at his desk in Sector 7G, asleep, dreaming of donuts, while the world outside his window slowly glows green. The Simpsons has been on the air for 36 years. It has been going too far for 36 years. And for 36 years, we have watched every single minute of it. Thank you for spending 2 hours in Springfield with me. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more. And if you're still awake, well done. Most people fell asleep somewhere around the Apu section. But whether you're conscious or drifting off, Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is. That's the whole point. I'll see you in the next one.